Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for joining us. Of course, it's virtually this year for the 15th annual Phillips Society celebration. For those of you who I haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Britt Nicholson, and I'm the Senior Vice President for Development here at Mass General. Now, I know I'm not the only one in this Zoom room today who wishes we could gather together in person. Uh, and This annual event is one of my favorite events, and primarily because I enjoy a chance to see all of you and engaged in small conversations to catch up. Many of you that I know so well. Um, for those of you who have attended this luncheon in the past in person, uh, unfortunately, no one's going to get the flower arrangement to take home this year. But we all hope you're enjoying the little special gift that was sent to you at your home. And although we're not in person, I am delighted to be with you virtually, most especially since I haven't seen you as a group since September of 2019. It just seems so long ago. But I want you to know that I enjoy every opportunity to share how grateful we are for your steadfast support of Mass General. The Phillips Society has nearly 800 members, and you are among our most illustrious donors. As many of you know, we're publicly launching an ambitious fundraising effort this fall. We've had the silent or leadership phase of the campaign going on for just over 3 years. The goal is $3 billion, and I'm really pleased to announce that a little bit more than halfway through the campaign, we've raised $1.9 billion to date. Now, the generous and forward-thinking philanthropic commitment of Phillips Society members illustrates to others that without philanthropy, Mass General would not be able to reach its bold goals to transform patient care, break new ground in medical research, trailblaze in medical education, and of course, build healthier communities. The planned and endowed gifts committed by you, the members of the Phillips Society, will provide extraordinary funding in future years to support every single area of the hospital, and as well as touching every corner of our mission. Now, over the coming months, you'll hear more about the campaign for Mass General, and your role as Phillips Society members is central. As I've said before, you are among our closest supporters, and there are a number of exciting initiatives in store for the campaign, including a legacy challenge, which we hope will inspire other members of the MGH community to follow your lead to support Mass General. And we thank you for creating this momentum. It's really an understatement to say that this is a pivotal moment in healthcare, and especially for Mass General. As you saw in the news and through our recent hospital communications, the hospital's longtime president, Peter Slavin, decided to step down after 4 decades at Mass General, 18 years of which he served as president of this remarkable institution. Peter Slavin simply was an extraordinary leader whose vision, compassion, and thoughtful approach, including his commitment to increasing the equity and inclusivity of the care we provide for our patient communities, have strengthened our hospital and positioned it for a very bright future. It's now my distinct honor to introduce a colleague, a good friend, Dr. David Brown, the new president of Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. Brown started his new job on September 8th. And for those of you who are counting, this is day 3 of his new job. And in fact, this is his first philanthropic event as president. Some of you may know Dr. Brown already. In his 3 decades at Mass General, he's established himself as an outstanding visionary and collaborative clinician, educator, and just a remarkable leader. In addition to his many clinical, academic, and administrative successes, David will be an enthusiastic partner in our fundraising initiatives. I know he will enjoy becoming acquainted with all of you over the months ahead. And so please welcome Dr. David F.M. Brown, President of Massachusetts General Hospital.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Britt, for those kind words. I'm really honored to join this group today. On behalf of the hospital, I want to extend my deep appreciation for the members of the Phillips Society for the commitment and generosity to Mass General. It's really great to see some familiar names on the attendee list, but for those who I have not yet met, let me just share a little bit about myself. I grew up in Western Massachusetts in Amherst, and with the exception of 4 years as an undergrad in New Jersey and 4 years as a medical student in New York City, I spent my entire life here in New England. As Britt mentioned, I arrived at Mass General 32 years ago to start my internship, and from the start, I knew I never wanted to leave. I joined the faculty in 1992 as a clinician educator and a clinician scientist in the Department of Emergency Medicine. And for the last 8 years, until 3 days ago, I served as a department chair, running what is the busiest emergency department in New England. So I'm an MGH lifer. Mass General is part of my DNA, and I have love, respect, and deep affection for this incredible institution and its people. At the same time, I have a clear-eyed understanding of the challenges we face and those challenges which we must overcome as we integrate with our partner institutions into our Mass General Brigham health system. I'm a supporter of our vision to achieve this goal and better serve all of our patients here in New England and around the world. At Mass General, we all stand on the shoulders of the giants who came before us. And for me, that giant is Peter Slavin, who, as Britt said, for 18 years was our president and an inspiring mentor for me. Among Peter's many admirable traits are his humility, his commitment to quality and safety of patient care, and his deep commitment to the underserved, to diversity, and to health equity. These traits, which I've tried to emulate during my years in leadership, are part of the special sauce, I think, that has made Mass General such a wonderful place, a place where all 28,000 employees believe, and correctly so, that they are collectively providing the absolute best that medicine has to offer our patients. It's such an honor to follow Peter Slavin, and I know that I have big shoes to fill. Now at Mass General, we often talk about the 4 pillars of our work: patient care, research and innovation, education, and community engagement in health. Our fundraising campaign is built around these 4 pillars. Our strategic priorities are designed to transform the ways we provide patient care, discover new ways to treat diseases, train the next generation of healthcare leaders, and improve the health and well-being of the members of our community across the region and truly around the world. We cannot do this life-saving work, this healthcare altering work, without the support and generosity of supporters like yourselves. Planned gifts, as well as endowments, all demonstrate a commitment to the future and the importance of creating such a legacy. There's no doubt that your forward-thinking philanthropy has already set us on a path to success with our campaign, as Britt has said, and more importantly, will allow us to advance our mission to transform the future of healthcare. So thank you for inviting me here today to meet with you. I really can't wait to meet all of you in person soon when it's safe to do so. But until then, please be safe, be well, and thank you again for your commitment to Mass General. We're just so fortunate to have all of you as part of our family.
David, thank you. You know, there is a great deal of excitement at Mass General about the future, and we have much to feel hopeful about and to look forward to. And that's why it's so fitting that our program today is focused on living forward healthfully. You have the special opportunity to learn from our very own experts about the importance of living healthfully at all phases of life through a panel discussion. Now, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see something called a Q&A feature. So please submit your questions using that feature, and our panelists will do their best to answer as many of your questions as possible after they finish their prepared remarks. Now, today's discussion will be moderated by Dr. Christine Ritchie, Mass General's Kenneth L. Meinecker Endowed Chair in Geriatric Medicine, a director of the Center for Aging and Serious Illness in the MGH Mongan Institute, and a research director at the MGH Division of Palliative Care and Geriatric Medicine. And if that weren't enough, she's also director of the MGH Dementia Care Collaborative. Dr. Ritchie is a board certified geriatrician and palliative care physician with long-standing experience in research and clinical care at that intersection of aging and serious illness. Dr. Ritchie, the stage is all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Nicholson and Dr. Brown. And I want to welcome each of you to today's Phillips Society event, where we're going to be talking about living forward healthfully in the midst of and past this pandemic. You know, because of the work that I do in aging and serious illness, I get to think pretty much on a regular basis about how we might live our best lives in the middle of these challenges around our health and our future. And so to that end, I'm very excited to also have with me Dr. Anna Maria Vranceanu and Dr. Matt Russell. And if you could also just audience a little bit about yourself.
Great, thanks very much. Hospital. I'm also a care physician area as a educator has been on teaching high stakes communications using a relationship centered communication model. Much of my work as a primary care doctor and consultant centers on helping people reframe their quality of life and their expectations in the face of aging and decline. I'm very much looking forward to having a brisk conversation with Dr. Ritchie and who I'm going to introduce next, Dr. Vranceanu.
Thank you, Dr. Russell and Dr. Ritchie. So I'm a clinical psychologist at Massachusetts General Hospital. I direct the Integrated Brain Health Clinical and Research Program within the Department of Psychiatry. My research focuses on developing skills programs to support individuals and families to successfully navigate aging and medical illness. In my work with patients, I think a lot about ways to deconstruct some of the complex psychology principles and make them more accessible and easier to integrate within our daily lives. I'm honored to be here today with Dr. Ritchie and Dr. Russell and all of you to share a conversation about strategies to live forward healthfully.
Thanks, Dr. Vranceanu. So, as we all know, the past 18 months have been unlike any other for many of our lives. The unfolding of a pandemic that's brought fear, hardship, loss, and to many, not just one lap around the globe, but now a second with the Delta variant, which continues to extract a fairly meaningful toll on our community. Our lives remain uncertain. And while we are eager to get on with our life, this specter of COVID-19 remains, and we've had to get used to adapting to mask wearing and vaccinations and COVID tests. And while we're all thrilled about the miracle of the COVID vaccines, and we're seeing reductions in severe illness and death among those who are vaccinated, we still hear about breakthrough illnesses, and we see young people who may not be fully vaccinated still getting severely ill with COVID-19. It's hard to plan, and frankly, sometimes it's just hard to know what the next step will look like. And yet, with each passing day, a precious day of our relatively short lives goes by. And so it's worth pausing and asking ourselves, how might we live well, maybe even flourish in the middle of this uncertain and unpredictable time? So today, what we'd like to do is we'd like to talk with you about how you might live forward healthfully as we turn our face towards 2022 and beyond. How can we thoughtfully and planfully live in a place of contentment, maybe even joy, while we navigate inevitable challenges and setbacks in our lives and in our health? So today we'll talk about how you might flourish in those days ahead. And just to set it out there right at the beginning, we're not going to talk about diet, good sleep, and exercise, because we figure you already know that those are very important for your health and well-being. Instead, we're going to be talking about what we're learning from research about flourishing and resilience. And so to start that off, Dr. Vranceanu, can you tell us what we mean by that word flourishing?
Sure. So in simpler terms, flourishing means living within the optimal range of human functioning. We can think of a flourishing individual as someone who pursues and experiences positive emotions like joy, love, compassion, pride, and gratitude.
And until recently, right, much of the scientific community believed that our ability to flourish was relatively stable, a function of our personality. What's pretty exciting is that we now know that we can be intentional about cultivating our ability to flourish across our lifetime. At any age, we can start cultivating skills and habits to help us flourish. So today, we're going to speak about 8 ways, remembered by the mnemonic flourish, on living forward healthfully in the years ahead. Here are those 8 ways, and we'll go through each one of them step by step. Flow, learning, optimism, understanding our purpose, relationships, intentionality, setting a plan, and last but not least, honoring our unique contribution to the world. So Dr. Vranceanu, would you please talk to us about some of these elements of flourishing?
Absolutely. So let's start with the letter F for flow. We can cultivate a state of flow or engagement by first becoming aware of the activities and things that naturally absorb us, and then trying to increase their frequency in our lives. This may be spending time in nature or engaging in a creative pursuit. A flourishing individual aims to stay engaged and absorbed into the specific activities that they're doing, rather than getting caught up in what was or what will come next. And we can all think about being fully engaged with an activity such that we lose track of time, perhaps when listening to music or watching a sunset. We tend to experience flow when we engage in activities that are just right for our skill level. And so pursuing activities that are not too easy or too challenging is best for promoting engagement or flow. Flourishing can also be optimized through the letter L for learning. We can cultivate a sense of accomplishment and competency through continuous learning and by setting goals and working toward achieving them. This not only cultivates positive emotions, but also builds confidence and pride as we look back at our lives and provide experiences to draw from when we encounter life's challenges. Flourishing also comes with the letter O for optimism. We can actively work toward becoming more optimistic and increase the amount of positive emotions we experience. This may be through building a gratitude practice where we take time to specifically reflect and focus in on the positive things in our lives, or joke and bring humor to day-to-day life situations. A key part of flourishing is the U, which stands for understanding our why. This means having purpose in life, a sense of meaning, and serving something that is bigger than ourselves. We can cultivate a sense of purpose and meaning by reflecting on our why, our life's values, and then ensuring that we spend our time consistent with the things that are important to us. Once we identify our why, we can strive to live in alignment with our life purpose. Meaning can come from work, family, creativity, community, or spirituality and religion. Doing an activity that brings us pleasure in the moment has actually little to no after effect, but helping someone else tends to have a lingering positive impact.
Those are such great practical examples. Thank you, Dr. Vranceanu. And I can think of so many examples of people leaning into their why throughout their lives with that continuous learning and also that alignment with their why. One such person that I've been inspired by is Ingeborg Sillam-Rappaport, who is a neonatologist in Germany, whose PhD dissertation was interrupted during the Nazi regime. It was many years later, actually into her 90s, when she decided she was going to complete that PhD. And she completed her PhD at the University of Hamburg at the age of 102. So we never can stop that learning process. It's always there for us. Another key part of flourishing is R for relationships. Perhaps one of the most important ways to optimize flourishing in our lives is to nurture or expand actually our relationships. And we can do this through a lot of different ways: celebrating successes, sharing good news with each other, being attentive and present during conversations with others. We can also reach out and connect to people who are much younger or older than we are and learn from them. One example that I've been exposed to is something that's called the multimodal intergenerational social contact intervention, a real mouthful. But essentially what it does is it brings together people who have an age difference of 20 years or more and gives them the opportunity to engage with a sort of a reciprocity type frame in some kind of creative activity. I've seen this program in action. It's quite remarkable. Everyone gains, and the relationships that ensue are often enriching and life-giving. Nurturing relationships also encompasses cutting slack to people when they don't quite meet our expectations. Reconnecting to people who we've not spoken with for a long while, or maybe with whom you had a grudge of some kind, not letting those get in the way with those deeper connections. The number of relations in one's support network are not as important as the quality is those relationships. Social connection becomes quite important as we age. We know that loneliness and social isolation is associated with increased mortality. So those connections are worth garnering, protecting, and expanding the older we get.
Individuals who are flourishing are also intentional, and we can remember this with the letter I. They set and pursue goals that are innately motivated and show grit in reaching these goals. I think it's important to mention that flourishing does not mean the absence of negative emotions or setbacks. However, individuals who are flourishing can bounce back quicker from challenging situations and even experience what we call post-traumatic growth, where the challenging experience or struggle leads to closer relationships, increased sense of one's strength, and a heightened appreciation for life.
Thanks, and that's really helpful to keep in mind that that dynamic around resilience, the strength and the adversity occurring at the same time. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how to think about flourishing in the context of caregiving, which is a point of connection, often associated with intentionality, but can also take a toll.
Absolutely. Within our social networks, becoming a caregiver is an inevitable part of life. We are caregivers for our children, for our parents, and sometimes for our partners and for our friends. All these experiences are challenging, both emotionally as well as functionally. Functionally, they require swift adjustments to new responsibilities that come on top of the normal life responsibilities and add significant demands on time and on resources. Emotionally, these experiences are complex and depend on the situations we are navigating and, of course, the identity of the person we care for. Caregiving often involves complex role changes and family dynamics that can bring painful emotions to both the caregiver and the person who is cared for. It's important to remember that effective navigation of caregiving actually starts before becoming a caregiver. On a practical level, it is important to build a strong social network as well as the financial resources necessary for successful caregiving. This would allow the ability to engage help and functional support as a caregiver. It is also important to be intentional about having difficult conversations about what caregiving might look like with partners and adult children, both around the practicality of decision-making and about preferences and needs. Such conversations are incredibly challenging and allow for deeper connections and a sense of relief and preparation for things that might come. One can continue flourishing even during the most challenging times of the caregiver experience. This does not mean the absence of sadness, pain, grief, and moments of overwhelm. Rather, it allows one to navigate the caregiver experience while also intentionally cultivating positive emotions, finding meaning, taking breaks for engagement in activities that bring flow, and most importantly, allowing others into the caregiver experience for practical and emotional support.
Those are really useful and practical thoughts for thinking about how we flourish in the context of caregiving. Another way to flourish is to set a plan. Now, most of us like to plan for travel, although it's gotten a little bit complicated lately. We love to travel for plan for vacations, but we also benefit from planning for a future that might not look the way we want it to. As we mentioned earlier, we know that living forward healthfully is flexing our resilience muscles, and that basically means letting adversity teach us and make us stronger. Anyone who has experienced loss knows how devastating it can be, but also strengthening at the same time. And as humans who will experience loss in our future, we can also thoughtfully plan for likely losses, potential losses of function, or changes from our baseline health. So Dr. Russell, you alluded to this in your introduction. I wonder if you could talk with us about ways we can plan for potential losses in our future.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to just start with normal aging. We know that as we get older, we do lose some function in terms of things like our kidney function or our skin elasticity or the blood vessel compliance. Those things are just going to happen as we acquire years. But there are also other losses that can accumulate as a result of diseases. Now, as on the medical side of things, we help prepare for these things through preventative care, trying to minimize the impact and detect the disease before it's a bridge out ahead moment. We know that a significant number of people will acquire things like diabetes and cancers, and that's why we screen for them. So in this context, the analogy is anticipatory planning. We know that a significant number of us are going to develop some functional and or cognitive limitation that will require us to adapt in any number of ways. This may be planning for something like one floor living, as I think about my hips and knees and trouble getting upstairs, or looking at the community that I'm choosing to live in and wondering what are the services available for me for successful aging. And then finally, it might just be setting a plan with a trusted family member or friend to introduce them to my medical story or financial situation in the event that I'm going to need help making decisions down the line. Now, COVID was certainly not something anyone planned for, and yet it did require us all to massively change our lifestyle and expectations. Serious illness and disability can make this same demand on us. So as we age and our friends and perhaps family members move away, our children are living their lives in different parts of the country, we ask ourselves, what's my plan going to be? And in geriatrics, in palliative care, we use the mantra, we're hoping for the best and preparing for the worst. Now, I think about my retirement planning when I talk about this. I find it overwhelmingly boring. And yet I realize how important it is to make sure I have enough financial security for once I retire. There are professionals who sit down with me and go through it all, and I would rather talk about anything else. I think a similar experience for us is that we have to start actively planning for what may be ahead in our future, loss of function and death. It's not really a pleasant topic, and yet most of us have very strong hopes and opinions about what we would want that to look like. So whereas I'd like to retire on knowing that it's a market upswing and I'll be fine, I also have to prepare for a rainy day. Similarly, in the hope that I'll be fine and fully independent until I'm a ripe old age and then one night pass away peacefully in my sleep, that needs to be balanced with the observed reality that the lived experience of many of us is quite different. So here are some what I call the 6 Ds of setting a plan. First one is D for domicile. What's the plan for the home? Are you living in a townhouse? Do you need to think about one floor living? What is the proximity to healthcare, to family and friends nearby, maintenance and downsizing? What adaptive equipment will I need? My community, how am I interacting with my community? As we've said, isolation is a huge problem. So I need to make sure I'm connected to my friends, my family, my religious group, any activities. And then it may be I say to myself, where do I want to age? Do I want to age in place in my own home? Am I thinking of a graduated living community or an assisted living? These are all good things to start thinking about. The next D is dollars. As we get older, we often need to dig into our pockets to provide extra care to keep ourselves safe in home so we can age comfortably. And we want to make sure that our finances are in order. And I might need to think about, how do I get a caregiver to help when I need assistance? The next D is drugs. So we can accumulate over the course of our lives a laundry list of medications. Your cardiologist gives you this pill, your kidney doctor gives you that pill, or your primary care doctor gives you that one. But the more medications we're taking, the more a risk of adverse reactions, drug interactions, and incorrect dosing complications. So a thoughtful reconciliation of my medicines to make sure that these medicines still make sense is really important. What was ideal for me to take at 45 may no longer be as helpful when I'm 75. But then it's not just the medicines, it's how am I going to get my medicines? And when will I need someone to help me set them up for proper medication adherence if I'm not able, if I have some memory problems, for example? The next D is driving. So this is probably the hardest conversation that we have in our clinic and here in geriatrics. In America, our freedom and independence is so tied to the automobile and the act of driving. And yet there are times when, because of physical or cognitive limitations, we may have to stop driving. Navigating that topic is rarely easy, and there are resources out there to help guide the conversation with a loved one. For example, the Alzheimer's Association has a guidebook. But proposing alternatives to driving, such as the ride or rideshare apps, can preserve that independence and keep the patient safe, or sorry, the person safe. And lastly, just that the last two Ds are decline and death. So this is building on decision-making. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped over my decision-making. Right now, I make my own decisions, but at some point, if I develop some cognitive impairment, I may need help making decisions. And it isn't just, do I do this or do I do that? It's, what are my values and how do I see this stage of my life? And how do I want my life to look in this stage? And having that conversation with the person you've decided to be your decision maker is so key to make sure that they're going to have not only the understanding of your wishes, but also the fortitude to be able to carry them out. Now I'll talk about the last two Ds, decline and death. Our inevitable decline and death that happens. And we think we'll know when we're declining and that it'll be obvious to everyone, including the healthcare providers. The lived experience in 21st century healthcare is that we often realize a person has entered the last phase of their life in hindsight, because there's always something to be done. There's always another intervention. And it's only really coming to light that the person declined when we look back. And so we don't have to start thinking about our decline and death at the moment of our decline, but really starting to think about, how will I reframe my life if I start to have some sort of physical decline? I think in this moment about my grandmother. Many geriatricians who go into the business really had a great relationship with their grandparents, and I certainly did with mine. And you know, she was an avid gardener, and when I was a teenager, she basically told us, the grandkids, you know, go out and pick this and fix this and weed, and we did that. And then pretty soon she was no longer inspecting our work, but she was sitting out in the garden, enjoying herself. What I didn't realize at the time was that she had osteoporosis, and this was before we had medications to reverse the devastating impact, and she was losing physical function. And my dad actually asked her, geez, what's going to happen now that you're having this functional decline? And she said, oh, that's okay, I have more time to read. She was an avid reader, was a patron of several libraries, and she was able to do this radical reframing based on the grace of accepting what was happening to her, but also having some resiliency to be able to say, I'm no longer able to do this, but I can do that. So whether we're facing our own or loved ones mounting medical conditions, or if functional decline is occurring, we have to say, what are the things that might be taken off my list of possibilities, and what can I do to optimize my quality of life and plan to maintain my role as the captain of my ship?
Thanks, Dr. Russell. What great ideas. I will put those into my back pocket and start working on setting a plan myself on many of those very important strategies that you just came up with. So our last letter is H, for honoring your unique contribution in the world. How do we do that day to day, Dr. Russell?
It's a great question. So in palliative care and hospice, we often will speak of the work that a patient has to do to achieve satisfactory end of life closure. But for so many of us, this is not something that has to wait. We do this, for all of our lives, and we can reflect on our lives and share our wisdom and experience. We can build deeper relationships with the younger generations in our families and communities. There's always someone in the next generation who wants to know, how did we get here? What was our story? And that link, having lost a generation of my family now, last year was the last sibling of my dad's generation, passed away. Now we're going to my oldest first cousin, and it's just like, gosh, we wish we had more time and recorded things. So you might want to write your memoirs, or have a video archive interview done with a family member or a friend. We ask this questions in our hospital system about a patient. Tell me your life story, and it's helpful for us. But think about what's so important for the people that you've gathered around you for your life. They may want to relive and record your accomplishments, but it also might be they just want to record you telling that hilarious story that captivated so many friends at dinner parties. For them, the idea is to capture that bit of you that inspired them. But for us as people, it's so important to know that when we leave, in our hearts, we need to know that we were here and that we contributed in some way.
That's awesome. Thank you, Dr. Russell. And it's an encouragement for all of us to think about how we can leave that positive legacy in every day that we have as an opportunity to live together. So today we've talked about how to live forward healthfully in the midst of a pandemic that continues. We can flourish by staying in F, flow, continually L, learning and pursuing growth in new ways, through O, optimism, choosing a positive mindset through gratitude and generosity, U, understanding our why, staying connected in our R, relationships, and being intentional in our pursuits of new connections, S, setting a plan for the future, and H, honoring our special and unique place in this world. We hope that this year will give you an opportunity to try some of these strategies, maybe one that you haven't done so far, as a way of flourishing and living forward healthfully. And no matter what this year brings, we hope it brings good things for you, and we look forward to coming alongside and learning with you.
Well, that's terrific. I think we have some time for questions that have come into the Q&A box. The first two are actually relatively specific. So I'm not going to assign it to one of you, but let you just decide amongst yourselves and jumping in for the answer. So this audience member says, thank you so much for this helpful information. Can you provide suggestions on how to improve the aging process for a two-time transplant recipient on immunosuppressant medications and prednisone for 40 years? Again, thank you all for the work that you do.
There are so many great potential strategies, and I'm guessing that this questioner has probably engaged in many of these already. Certainly being thoughtful about and careful about exposure to situations that might introduce infection is very important when you're on an immunosuppressant, and I'm guessing you know that quite well. The big thing for anybody who's on prednisone, I think, is to be very attentive about exercise, especially gravity-inducing exercise, which can be a really important way of reducing your risk for osteoporosis. Engaging in thoughtful mindfulness practices to stay in that positive frame of mind. And again, like all of us, planning for our future. Those are the things that, at least for me, immediately come to mind. Dr. Russell and Dr. Vranceanu, what would you like to add?
I think one big challenge for folks with multiple medical conditions is that they can be exposed to many different providers and sometimes even hospital systems. And what I always like to recommend is make sure that there is a trusted medical provider who is putting it all together and keeping it all intact. You may be seeing a kidney doctor for one thing, a liver doctor for another, and through no fault of the kidney doctor or the liver doctor, they may be, at cross purposes. And it's so important to make sure that someone is looking at that big picture for you. The other thing I would say is making sure that you have frank conversations about what procedures and tests you would be willing to go through and endure, since sometimes as we get older, the benefits are outweighed by the risks and the hospitalizations and complications that follow. So having very frank discussions, both with your trusted family, friends and family members about what you would want, but also with your providers and saying, here's what I'm willing to do. I think so often we feel like we're on a conveyor belt and we have to do the next step that the doctors recommend. But in geriatrics and palliative care, we have very narrow straits to navigate. And so we're often saying, let's look at the better choice rather than the best choice. What would make the most sense? And it's really important to individualize it.
Yeah, and just really, really great suggestions from Dr. Ritchie and Dr. Russell. The one thing that I want to add goes in line with what Dr. Russell was mentioning earlier, this idea of radical reframing, or what we call psychological flexibility, right? So really being able to adapt as symptoms change and be flexible around the activities that you're able to engage in, and how you're approaching life and general life activities.
Thank you. Again, here's another one that's very specific. First of all, thank you all for this wonderful presentation. You belong to a health system, MGB, that has a explicit commitment to the community. Given that, what would you recommend to a young homeless mother who's lost her apartment due to COVID-19 eviction? Is there anything that MGB can do to help these homeless mothers, quote, flourish? Thank you.
That's a really important question as well. And I am proud of the work that we do at MGH and at MGB to connect and partner with our community to address these very challenging issues around housing and around food security and around meaning making and the ability to have work that's important to people. We do actually have some great community partnerships with organizations that specifically support women. I'd be happy to connect this person to that, to some of those groups. And we have folks within actually our MGH community who serve on the boards of some of these organizations. And they're specifically there to support women who find themselves in difficult situations, often through no fault of their own, and who need just a little extra support as they try to get back on their feet. And Dr. Nicholson, I'd be happy to provide that information to this individual offline.
Great. Okay. Next question is, first of all, what a great presentation. When you were talking, Dr. Russell, when you were talking about losses, it reminded me that one of the things I'm looking forward to with autonomous vehicles is that somebody won't have to come to me with the question about taking away my keys. Having said that, is it possible to email or let us know the 8 steps in Flourish and 6 steps of D so that we can remember them? It reminds me of the first time I saw and filled out an advanced care directive, how helpful it was to have those specific questions, to guide me in my thought processes.
Yes, and I think that this is, after the presentation, we can put it, we'll put it together in a nice handout for folks to have. It isn't a cognitive test that you have to remember everything that we said, but it's really just the framework. And I completely second what you are saying with the autonomous vehicles. As someone who has driven in Boston traffic my entire life, I cannot wait to give up my keys. and let Elon Musk's people take me somewhere.
I have to say, we just have to hope that the computers in these autonomous cars aren't so smart that they start behaving like Boston drivers.
Exactly.
So several of you mentioned appropriately the importance of relationships in flourishing. And I know this is a broad question and might not have an answer, but I'd be really, really interested to know your views that does social media help or hurt in these relationships?
What a great question. And I think it's like so many questions of this nature, both and. So I think there are many instances where social media outlets like Facebook really provides a sense of community and connection. I know for me, I've reconnected with folks that I haven't connected with for years through Facebook, just by learning where they are in their life and then reconnecting. So I think it can be a good start. It's probably not sufficient. It doesn't offer the same kind of opportunity for authentic interaction and connection that a true sort of FaceTime or Zoom or hopefully in-person type interaction can have. So I would say it's a good starting point, but it's not sufficient. And part of the authenticity that's so important here is really so that we can have somebody or a multitude of people who truly know us, understand us, and to state what we said earlier, have our back. We know that when we have people who we truly can count on, this is the big issue, that will be there for us if we have an unexpected need arise. That's actually a very good harbinger for positive future outcomes. Dr. Vranceanu, you want to add to this? This is something you think about a lot.
Yeah. I completely agree with this answer. I think, thinking of sort of social media platforms like Facebook, right? Like we see just one side of people's lives. And a lot of the times that can make some people feel like they're not good enough, or their lives are perhaps not as great. And I think it's easy to get caught into the number of friends or contacts that one has on the social media platforms. And exactly like what Dr. Ritchie was saying, there isn't really space for those very meaningful, important conversations, the vulnerability that actually brings people together and allows you to feel that sort of sense of connection. And like we've discussed earlier, you really have to have 2 or 3 people in your life that have your back, in addition to acquaintances. So definitely a positive, for some people who are very isolated, but not enough to benefit our health.
I think one thing that happened during COVID for us was we were very clearly having patients experiencing isolation for the first time in large volume. And we initiated our COVID town hall, which is basically a Zoom meeting where our patients would come and hear the latest updates. From that, which patients loved because it tracked the entire course of COVID. But from that, we had a smaller subgroup of folks who formed a connection clinic with us. And it's still continuing to this day. Every other Thursday, we get together as a group and have a fabulous chat. And it isn't medical, but it is life-giving. And it is so important. And I think that this is that part of, if I am functionally, I'm isolated because of a functional limitation, I will be able to visit with my friends in ways that now technology allows. And that's invaluable in so many ways.
Here's a question that I think you touched on, and I think that this audience member is actually looking for a bit more advice. Said, I'm a caregiver, and what can I do to make sure I'm staying mentally and physically well while my priority is helping someone else? I actually feel guilty and selfish when I begin to take time for myself, even though I intellectually know that it's important.
Yeah, I think this is such a great question. Being a caregiver is such a challenging task, and it is very easy to focus only on the person we care for, to feel that we need to do everything ourselves, and also forget about prioritizing our own needs. And this is why caregiving is associated with substantial mental as well as physical health challenges. And so I think as a caregiver, it's important to ask and accept help with caregiving tasks so that you can take time to recharge your own batteries. You can perhaps ask help with preparing meals, or someone to take the person you care for out for a walk, or just keep them company while you go for a walk. The issue of guilt is very, very common. And one strategy that can help is this idea of self-compassion, where when you notice that perhaps you set this unrealistic standards as a caregiver, and you notice that guilt coming up, to cut yourself some slack and understand that you are doing the best that you can, and that you're making the best decisions that you can based on the information that you have available in the moment. It's important to use social support, so perhaps joining a support group to get emotional support from people who might be going through the same experience, or even just getting practical tips from people who are dealing with similar situations. And of course, staying connected with family and friends, and getting that emotional support, that's very helpful. And prioritize your own self-care. So making sure that you do get enough sleep, that you can arrange for ways to be physically active, set time for self-reflection and engagement in some of the things that we discussed earlier that can help you flourish. Perhaps, finding time to get meaning from the caregiver experience, cultivate positive emotions, and finding activities that promote flow.
And just to add to all those incredible tips that Dr. Vranceanu gave, I just want to mention two things. One is that both Dr. Vranceanu and I do a lot of research around caregiving. And what I can say is what you just described is not unique to you. You are not alone. I think people who are caregiving often find themselves in a place where they're tired, yet they don't feel like they can care for themselves in the way that they would like to. They feel that they're becoming increasingly socially isolated. And so I would say, please reach out, be intentional in making those social connections, because just as they say on the plane, it's important for you to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you can actually put it on someone else. You won't be able to be the caregiver you'd like to be without caring for yourself, as hard as that may be, and as hard as that may feel at times.
I've always said that our Phillips Society audience is asked the best questions, and here's another example. How do I work with family members to ensure we are on the same page when it comes to caring for each other and our parents?
I love that question. This is a critically important question. I think Dr. Russell will have some really important perspectives on this.
Absolutely.
This is a critically important opportunity for you to actually be proactive. And there are a lot of different ways to do this. There are a lot of actually tools out there. There's something called Go Wish cards, which are little cards that you can pass around and give people an opportunity to say what their values are, especially if they become seriously ill. This is something actually my husband and I did just to try to make sure we actually understood each other in terms of what was important to each of us if we were to become sick. There is this whole program called Prepare for Your Care, which is a website where you can actually download a kind of advanced directive planning tool and go through that. And during COVID, we actually printed those things out and went over them in great detail with our children. We wanted to make sure that they understood what was important to us. And so I would say, if nothing else, make it a game, make it a kind of family project or a family night, and be intentional about it. Dr. Russell, what would you like to add?
So just echoing everything you said, there's another resource called the Conversation Project, which is homegrown in Boston, that actually has a toolkit for the dining room table to actually have this conversation. The main elements are you need to know what your own values are. So spending a little time in self-reflection about what you think quality of life is. I mean, we all want to be as functional and cognitively intact and live as long as possible. But there are obviously areas where you say, I wouldn't want this and I wouldn't want that, and have that conversation with yourself. As you're choosing somebody who's a caregiver, someone who's going to speak for you or help you make medical decisions, involving them in your healthcare story sooner rather than later, so that they've walked the walk with you and they understand the dilemmas you might be facing. Then also communicating with the family members who may not be in a decisional role to let them know why you've chosen this person and how they can support this person in honoring your wishes. And those are the most important conversations. Certainly, we as the healthcare providers want to know what your wishes are, and we can document that in our chart. But we want to make sure that you've had that thoughtful time and discussion, and you're not just having this conversation in a moment of emergency where we're not really thinking clearly in those moments because we're dealing with a crisis. So I hope that helps.
And just to add to that, just really amazing suggestions. I think it's important to remember that these are very challenging conversations. So the timing of these conversations is really important. So, scheduling these conversations and scheduling a chunk of time. And, my personal favorite is to do something fun after, so that you sort of close the door and you're able to move on rather than just, ruminate and think about that.
Chocolate.
I think one of our audience members actually has their hand up. Joe Cifalillo. Joe, do you want to make a comment? I'm not sure we've got the capabilities of doing that. Yeah, I think we can control the mic. Can you turn Joe's mic on? Oh, I see he isn't unmuting. All right. All right, well, Joe, we'll give you one more chance to unmute before we go on.
Britt, it was a mistake. I didn't mean to call you. I'm sorry. I apologize.
That's okay. It's great to hear your voice, Joe. All right.
Thank you.
All right. So before we wrap up, I'm just, this isn't a question. This is a comment that I think you'd all appreciate. I said, Dr. Russell, I think I'm speaking for virtually the entire audience to your suggestion to film a video archive. It's a wonderful idea. In more than one instance, I suggested getting a terminally ill friend's image and voice on video. My mother died very young, and unfortunately, because it was 50 years ago, we have only a 10-second video of her with no audio. So much of a person is captured by their voice. So again, just to let you know that that's certainly you resonated with the audience. So again, there are more questions. We can't get to them. I think it's just a tribute to our panelists in terms of how their your comments connected with this audience. I'd like to thank you, Dr. Ritchie, Russell, and Vranceanu for really an excellent discussion on living well and healthfully throughout our phases of our lives. I hope all of you enjoyed today's program as much as I did. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and once again for your inspiring commitment to Massachusetts General Hospital, and you be safe out there. Thank you.